He was at the big courtyard in front of the JCC.
Jesus.
Yeah, or like between the JCC and the Federation Building.
Goodness. I haven't seen him on astronaut. That's amazing. Was he always there? Or is he?
No, I
Is
think
it
they
just for
just
the day?
I think they just put him up there for the day. It's a statue of Herzl. Okay, so the question, we know that the Goslin has to return what he stole, but if he changed it in some way, then he pays cash, right? But what if the change that he made is a reversible change? That's what we were dealing with yesterday. So he says, if it's a reversible change, then you have to give it back to him in the way that it was when you stole it. So a person stole planks of wood and then nailed them together. You can remove the nails and you can detach them and give them back the way they were initially. Or if you stole earth and you turned it into a brick, so you haven't acquired it through that change. You can always grind it back down into earth. And this would, etc. Ein hagazlin kones hagzela elim kenis yashu haba'olim im shinui hashem, o yeyu shimshini rishus darak az kona hagazlin. So there are only two ways that the Gazlan acquires the item, either through Yeush together with a formal change of the item's name, meaning that it's significantly changed, or with Yeush together with changing hands, meaning the Gazlan goes ahead and gives it or sells it. Dirak az kana Gazlan, v'lachein tzarech lahashiv hagazlan es masha gazal, v'lo lahachzir hadamim. And therefore, the Gazlan has to give back the original item. Okay, so we're not going to go into some of the details here because it seems to be pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so let's look at the next issue. Shoel shalom midas almanas l'shalim. So if a person borrows without someone's knowledge, he borrows an item with the intent to pay him for that item. So what are we talking about? So here's the Sheila. Well, let's see what he means. She'ela. This is part of one of my criticisms is that sometimes his language is a little bit confusing, but we'll try to get through it. She'ela. Misha hishtamesh b'chefet shel chaver mibli yidiato. Someone uses his friend's item, his lawnmower, without his knowledge. Al das l'shalim schar avor oto shimush b'chefetz. But he has every intention on paying him for the use of his appliance. So I borrowed my friend's lawnmower, and my plan is, when payday comes around, I'm going to take a big 20 and stick it in his mailbox. Okay? Is that considered to be gezela? Oh, shim kavanaso l'shalim es haschar avor haschirus or shimush. But, or maybe you could argue that since my intention is to pay him for the use of the item, I'm not a Goslin. So what do you think based on what we've learned so far?
I would say it's 1,000 since this takes up without paying.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Agree with you. What?
I think a cousin is a cousin.
Yeah.
And what does the payment have to do with it? You could have just intended not to steal it, but to borrow it. So, right, like, it doesn't add anything, you're just gonna pay him.
Right.
Still taking without his permission.
Yeah. So the tshuva is Misha mishtamesh mibli yedias haba'olim, b'chol chayfetz shel chavero mibli yedias haba'olim, that if a person uses something without the knowledge of the owner, it doesn't matter what object it is, But if you take it without the owner's knowledge, even if your intention is to pay for that use, you're still considered to be a gazlan. And you have to pay for any depreciation that is caused through your use, and you're also liable for anything that happens to that object, even if it's completely by accident. However, there's one caveat. There's one exception to the rule. If this is an item that your friend normally rents out and doesn't just have it for personal use, but he has, let's say, a shop where he rents out appliances, and you go ahead and take an appliance without his knowledge, you're not called a gazlan if you take it. But that's provided that no one that works around him or his family members protest. But if someone who represents the owner tells you, like a family member or someone else that, let's say, works for the guy, tells you, hey, this lawnmower is not available. He's not renting this one. He needs it for his own use. And you go ahead and take it anyway, so then you are called a gazlan. So there's only one time when you would not be called a gazlan, when you take someone's appliance without their permission. And that's when it's meant to be for rent anyway. Now, obviously, taking someone's appliance who is in the business of renting out appliances without going through the normal procedure, okay, so maybe it's not gezela, but it's obviously there's got to be some other prohibition, because he needs you to sign a waiver and all of these contracts and all of these things, and you don't go ahead and do that. So then you are doing some kind of theft, but I guess it's not considered to be a formal theft. Okay, so he says nimtza. Okay, so let's just walk through the details. Kain mavur lefi ma shehevi morin b'shulchan aruch hatokef sfinato shel chavero va'asa b'malacha. The case that is brought in the Shulchan Aruch is if a person commandeers his friend's boat. You go down to the marina, you see your friend's boat, and you just get in, turn it on, and you start working with it. You go fishing. Im eina asuya lischar shamin kama pichta u'mishalim. If this boat is not meant to be rented out, so then you estimate what the wear and tear on the boat was, and the person would have to pay. Ve'im hi asuya lischar, im yara la b'torat schira tol v'yoret shelo birshus, im ratza habal litol schara notel, ratza litol pechasa notel. If, however, the boat is meant for rentals, so then the fact that the guy didn't ask permission means that the advantage is to the owner. He can either charge you for the wear and tear, or he can charge you for the rental fee that he normally charges, whichever is greater. Usually the rental fee is greater. The im yorad b'toras gezel nosein hapechas v'chol kayotze bazeh v'hu adinim not la al das she'ela shlomidas gazlan havi. So in all cases, you're called a gazlan in this situation. Now, where does he get this idea that you're not a gazlan if it's meant for rental? He says the source is in the Torah, and it's based on the Gemara, which says, Hatokev sfinato shel chavero, and the Torah adds, V'chein adinim not lo al das she'ela havika gazlan. If you take it to borrow it, you're considered to be a gazlan. And the Beis Yosef adds, V'chein adin dim not lo al das she'ela pashut hu al pi anytime you borrow something without permission, you're a gazlan. So it turns out that if the object was meant for being rented out, habreira biyad haba'olim ratzu notel schar kedin socher rak ena yochol litvo gam hapchat v'im ratzu notel pchat v'lo haschar v'chol zeh she'yitkavein lishtamesh u'lishalem haschar. So he's basically stating that the owner has the advantage when the appliance is meant for rentals that I can charge you the full rental fee. Ulam kasvu achronim de'im niskaben lihishtamesh shelo al dat l'shalem aschar. That if your intention was to, the guy who takes, he intended to use it without paying a rental fee, pater min haschar v'afilu b'chefetz omid lahaskir kevin de'yesh lo din gazlan mamish eno mishalim ela kishas hagzela v'im nichas me'elav chayav kevin she's chayav v'onsin kedin gazlan. He says, if a person had intended to steal it and then return it without renting it, so then you can't charge him the rental fee, which is very bizarre.
We just need to return it, that's the thing.
No, he has to return it.
But
The
we-
question is, does he have to pay the rental fee? So it all depends. It sounds very counterintuitive. He's saying that if your intention was not to rent it, but rather just to borrow it and not to pay for it, so then you're a gazlan. I guess the ramification is that you have this sin looming over you that you're a gazlan. You're not considered a gazlan, even though what you did was wrong, and in lechatchila it's not mutter to do this, just to confiscate someone else's item, even though your intention is to pay the rental fee for it. But you're not allowed to do that. But the ramifications are that in retrospect, as long as you paid the rental fee, you don't get the penalty of being a gazlan, which is
Return is, it's the Gasland, say, it's not a Gasland anymore when you return it voluntarily, let's say that it's not with code.
What's the definition
So
of a
once you
gazlan?
return it, he's okay, no?
No, it's not that you're automatically okay. Like I go ahead into your house and I steal your item, and then I come back the next day and I say, okay, here it is, it's back. We're good. I'm not a gazlan anymore. That doesn't work like that. Yeah, we're not good, right? You Hashem will not forgive you.
But he needs to bring, is it still a sin? He needs to bring a korban, or he needs to.
There actually is no korban for committing an act of gezela.
So there's no penalty.
There's a heavenly penalty.
Why?
There's a penalty in Shamayim. That's the difference. The difference is that you're labeled as a gazlan in Shamayim. That seems to be the only ramification.
Isn't that the whole introduction to this thing about Izela and the beginning of the world? How you could not really clean yourself from it. God basically was watching what was going on and said, no, I need to clean the whole world up.
Right.
It's a big thing.
Before the flood. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Next. She'ila. Adam shenitzrach le'eze kelim kedei lahatzil es mamono mehefsid shabolov pitom. A person needs certain items in order to save his property from imminent damage. So there was no way for him to prepare himself adequately because it all happened all of a sudden. And if he doesn't use this particular item, his property will be damaged. Am I permitted to take something from my neighbor that will help me save my property from imminent damage without their knowledge? Or am I called a gazlan? Since the owner normally would not lend these items out without permission, okay? So am I allowed to save my property? Like if I don't use this item, and I'm not going to damage it, I'll give it back in the same way that I found it. And even though normally I would have to ask my friend to borrow it, but this is an emergency because if I don't use this item, my property is going to be damaged. Can you think of an example? A hose. There's a fire in my backyard. I just grab my neighbor's hose to put out the fire. Great example. So I would normally have to ask him if I can borrow his hose, right? Okay. So here's the tshuva. Misha mishtamish b'chayfetz chaver shalom midaito kibichdei lahatzilis mamono b'mamon chavero im osazos al das l'shali muter lasos kain ve'ein din gazlan ela kesocher birishus. So if I use my friend's property in order to save my property, so as long as your intention is to pay him for the use of his item, for his hose, then you would be allowed to do it, and you would not be called a gazlan, but rather you're a renter, b'tzarech l'shalem haschar, and you'd have to pay the rental fee. Now, v'tam hadavar, kaven dehu tanai beistin, shemuter lahatzil mamonu b'mamon chaver al das l'shalom. The beistin, in the times of Chazal, made a tanai. They basically, and by the way, the beistin is authorized to make this kind of stipulation with everyone's money, with everyone's assets. Because we have a principle in halacha called hefker, beistin, hefker. You've heard that term before? That the beistin can declare all of our property to be totally ownerless. When you live as part of a Jewish community, the beistin is vested with the right to declare everyone's property to be hefker. So based on that, they can make stipulations about the use of your property even without your permission. So they made a communal takana, and the communal takana was that if someone's property is in danger, they are allowed to take your item to save their property as long as they pay you a rental fee. Okay? You don't have to pay for wear and tear fees, but you do have to pay a rental fee, which is usually higher than the wear and tear. But you don't have to pay both. You don't have to pay both the rental and for wear and tear. You just have to pay for one. So this is an interesting halacha. Let's see the source of this halacha. So Kosav Harama b'Choshen Mishpat, Halokeach Chamoro Shelo Midaito va'osa malachto, v'kavanaso litain lo scharo, havi kishoel shelo midas. V'im hachamor omed liskor lo havi gazlan. So the Rama, which we saw before, is if a person takes his friend's donkey without his knowledge, does whatever work he needs to do with his property, and his intention is to pay a fee. So you're still a gazlan and you're not allowed to do that. Okay? It's only if the donkey is meant for rentals, then you're not a gazlan. It doesn't mean you're allowed to do it because he may need it for himself, or it may have already promised it to somebody else, but you're at least you're not a gazlan. Umihu imichu bo b'nei veso va'omim shabala chamor tzarech lachamoro havi kishol shalomidas v'havi gazlan. If, however, you are informed by anyone else who's there that the owner does not want this donkey to be taken off the premises, and you go ahead and take it anyway, even though your intention is to pay, you're a gazlan. V'im lakcho lahatzil shelo v'rotza litin lebalachamor hefsedo lo havi gazlan detanai beistenu. The one exception is if you're taking the donkey to save your property. So then you're not a gazlan because that's a tanai beistin. That's a condition that was stipulated, or a takana that they made, that anytime your property can help save someone else's property, you must relinquish it to your friend as long as he's willing to pay you for the rental use. The Yesod v'shorish devarav hinam me'atruma sadeshen, and the source is from an early Rishon. Now, v'kosav al zeh hasma d'tnai beistinu, this was an institution of the beistin, that perusho dechol shepaga bo hezek pitom, t'nai beis adin sherishus biyado likach kelev shel chaveru lahatzil shelo, v'nosin lechaveru schar hakol kli v'chol kayotze bazeh. Okay, so he's just bringing us the sources. He says, Nira da afilu b'meisa machmas malacha pater. So he says you don't have to pay for depreciation for wear and tear. And even if the animal dies in the normal course of work, you're going to be potter as long as you didn't do anything to overwork the animal. And the reason is because you're a legitimate renter. A renter would not have to pay for the breakdown of the appliance or the death of the animal if he's using it in the normal course of work. So, okay. Let's look at the next one. She'ela, shoel shalom midas b'cheftzei mitzvah, borrowing something without permission when the object that you're taking without permission is for doing a mitzvah. So that's the case of the tefillin. We talked recently about borrowing someone's tefillin, right? And we saw that even though originally Chazal said you can borrow someone's tefillin without permission, later poskim established that people don't want their even though usually you wouldn't mind someone to use their talis and tefillin. Later poskim seem to equivocate on this matter, and there are some poskim who say that nowadays you're not allowed to borrow someone's talis and tefillin without their permission. So let's see. Here's the Sheila. Amru Chachamenu Zal Shol Shalomidas Gazlanhu Ulam Hitiru Lihishtamish Bechefetz Chaver Shalomidaito Litzarch Kiyum Mitzvah. So we know this rule. We know that even though you can't borrow someone's item without permission, but if you need the item to do a mitzvah, you could borrow his item without permission. And we need to explain this. Why did the rabbis permit this? Like what was their thinking? So he says the tshuva is mashihitiru chazal l'kayim mitzvah b'chefetz chaver mebli lahodiu al kach umitam da'anu omrim d'noach lo la'adam sheyasu mitzvah b'mamona. It's the reason is because we assume that a person would prefer that people use his property for mitzvahs. In other words, we estimate that that's the majority of people would be happy that their property is being used for another person to fulfill a mitzvah. And therefore, if you find a talis in shul, because let's say you can't find any of the shul's talisim, but you find someone else's talis, you're allowed to take it, put it on without the person's permission. It's totally okay. Same thing is true with tefillin. You can even take a guy's shofar and blow it, which is surprising because, what about the germs? I guess this is the same time that women were dipping their finger in the lebanon. Who cares about germs, right? Makes you strong, okay? Olito lulav shalomidas abba olam bishar yemei chag hasukas, or to borrow someone's lulav and esrog. Not on the first day, because on the first day it has to be ulakachtem lachem, has to belong to you. But on all subsequent days of sukkahs, it's okay. Umikol makom kol ma dehuter likach chefetz shel mitzvah mechaver b'li reshus ba'olav k'dei l'kayim bo as mitzvah. Hainu dafka be'akroi. However, there are a couple of caveats here. You're only allowed to use someone else's property to do a mitzvah if it's on a one-off basis. Not like, you come to shul every morning because you don't want to buy your own tefillin, and just every day you just borrow someone else's pair. Okay? Aval b'kivius aser. So it's not allowed to be like a regular daily occurrence. Another caveat, you can only use the item in the place where it is currently resting. You can't take it and then bring it home with you and then bring it back at the end of the day. So you're not allowed to take it somewhere else. Another caveat is that while you're using it, there's no concern that you'll damage it in some way. Aval im olu lavo lidei hezek v'chuli al chisaron mamon, asur lihishtamish b'chefetz hamitzvah. He says, but if there's a legitimate possibility or fear that the item will become damaged through your use, I guess let's say you have, you're with one of your children who's very wild, and by you taking his lulav, there's a possibility your kid's going to whack it and break the pitum on the esrog or whatever it is. So then, asur lihishtamish b'chefetz hamitzvah, af sheyavu lidei bittul hamitzvah, ba'ofen hazeh, ve'ein anu omrim nichalei le'inish. So then, you're not allowed to take it because we say that we the only time we say that a person would prefer that you use their item to do a mitzvah is only if it's not going to cost them significant amount of money. But if it's going to break the item or cause damage to the item, then we say that there's a limit to how much people want others to use their property for mitzvahs. Umitam zeh asur lilmod b'sefer chaver shalom yidaito v'afilu derech haroy. And that's why the initial in the ancient world and in the medieval world, the rabbis prohibited you from using your friend's sefer because sfarim were very precious and they were considered fragile. Michshash d'shema yikru hadapim merov shimushim, out of a concern that the pages may tear from poring over the books. The Yesh Omrim, Dim Efshel Lekabel Rishus Mi Bal Hatalas O Tefillin O Shar Cheftzei Mitzvah Uchagon Ba'ofen Shenimsa B'Kirvaso. And some say there's a further caveat. If you could get permission from the guy, because you know that he lives nearby, okay? And it's just, it'll take me an extra 10 minutes to walk over to his house to ask him permission, so I might as well just use them now. Or let's say you know that the fellow is very protective of his property and he has a track record of not sharing his items. In both those cases, you have to ask him permission first. And then as far as saying a bracha, if you make a bracha on his object of mitzvah without asking him, so there's a machlokes. V'nira lahalacha shev al taisa adif, v'hamavarach lo hifsid v'yesh al mi lismoch ve'ein maznichan osa. We'll see maybe in the notes, we'll see the basis of the machlokes. But at the end of the day, he says it's better not to make a bracha when you borrow someone else's mitzvah item without their permission.
So what happens if there's a shiva house and no Torah, and I'm a white member and I can't come in and take out a Torah and bring it back to the shiva house without so-called permission?
Yeah, that's a problem. It's a problem because number one, it's a hugely valuable item. So to take a Sefer Torah without permission, I think would be something that there's a genuine concern that this could be damaged. If the 700 and something members of the shul would take that liberty and come into the shul and take a Sefer Torah whenever they felt that they had a need for it, that would definitely ultimately result in a Sefer Torah getting lost or damaged. So I think that would be problematic halachically.
That'd be a Goslin?
You might be a Goslin.
I didn't do it though.
A new TV show. You might be a Goslin. Okay. Okay. Let me just skip to the part where he discusses that issue of making a bracha. Oh, Hashalah Sefer Torah. He has a section on this.
I knew that.
Yeah. There's a brisa that says that if you borrow a Sefer Torah from your friend, you're not allowed to lend it to somebody else. Umaksha al zeh Gemara madua davka Sefer Torah. People call davar acher v'shalem asula hashula acher. So the Gemara asks, why are you only talking about a Sefer Torah? Any item that you borrow, you're not allowed to lend to somebody else. So the Gemara says, Sefer Torah hutzrach lo l'tana lomar b'miyuchad shekain Mahu shetoimar noach lo la'adam shetasa mitzvah b'mamono. Hishmiya lanu atana shechachamim asu lahashel afilu sefer Torah b'lo rishus. Afshu yesh mitzvah b'davar yesh lo l'shol levakesh rishus mibal sefer Torah. V'rak az yachol lahashel lechavera. The chiddush is that even though using a sefer Torah is a mitzvah, so you might think, oh, I'm sure he's fine. So no, it's not okay. Okay, now,
Can you say bracha, they can't say bracha then?
so what's the argument? Give me a second. You know what we'll do? Let's continue this discussion on Monday, shall we? We'll pick this up. No, not on Monday. I guess our next year will be on Wednesday. And we'll pick this up in Mirz Hashem on Wednesday. Let me wish you all a good Shabbos and a Chag Sameach. Who do we have on the line here?
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi. Chag Sameach.
Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, Wayne.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Hag Sameach.
Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, everyone.
Take care. See you.